Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we are back with the 2016 film Shin Godzilla. This is Castle of Horror episode 331. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castle Bridge Media. With me from Austin is Tony Savaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, currently published by Comixology. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the Pan American Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. And finally, also in Denver, color commentary from Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Okay. Shin Godzilla. This movie is Shin Godzilla, or Shin Godzilla. It is a 2016 Japanese kaiju film directed by Hideaki Anno, with a screenplay by Anno and special effects by Shinji Higuchi. It was produced by Toho and distributed by Toho. It is the 31st installment in the Godzilla franchise. That is mind-boggling. The 29th Godzilla film produced by Toho. It is Toho's third reboot of the franchise, and the first film in the so-called Reiwa period. And it stars a cast of hundreds of dudes in white shirts, but mainly Hiroki Hasegawa, Yutaka Takanouchi, Satomi Ishihara. In the film, politicians struggle with bureaucratic red tape in order to deal with the sudden appearance of a giant monster that evolves whenever it is attacked. So, all right, this is unbelievable. It's going to be so fun to discuss this movie, and especially given that it came out just 2 years after the American reboot take, the legendary Godzilla. So last week we started with Tony. This week I think we should start with Julia. Let's go Julia, Drew, Tony, and then I'll go opening thoughts, Shin Godzilla.
Well, this is a really interesting look at Godzilla. It's basically what would happen if we had Godzilla today for the first time. Like what would happen in Japan, not today, but today. The idea of like, how would the bureaucracy handle it? How would the military handle it? What would happen? Like I love that idea. I love the idea that you're going to go in and be like, let's take from each, like if we're looking at the government, if we're looking at the government agencies, if we're looking at the military, how are they going to do this? And also, so that was really fun and interesting look at it, because I thought a lot of it would be true for the United States as well, as far as, at first being like, no, of course it's not a monster. That's ridiculous. And then when it turns out to be a monster and being like, okay, how do we handle this? And then all just the crazy with all the suits in the room and everything. However, of course, there are very few women in the room, which in today's government in America would be different, but in last year's government probably would have been the same. And the other thing is the fascinating evolution of Godzilla. Like literally, as we're watching the movie, his growing up from, I guess, the larval state or whatever, which was hilarious, that first creature that we see, to the Godzilla that we know. And then to a Godzilla that we don't know, which is this one who can blast lasers all along his spine and just wipe out the entire city with not only, atomic breath, but so overpowered, crazy overpowered, this creature. Anyway, just really interesting and fun. So much to talk about.
Yes, very good. Thank you very much. Drew, you actually watched it several times. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, this is the third time that I've watched this. I watched this when it was first available in the United States, and I watched it again right before the pandemic started, actually. And this time today. And this is actually the most I've enjoyed it, because I feel like the satirical elements that Julia was just talking about after the pandemic have just aged, even though this movie's not old by any stretch of the imagination, but it's aged very well. Like it plays extremely well. I think, in America, we're watching it as an American now, it really rings true. it is a movie, even though I think it is extremely well done and it's a very smart movie. It is a movie. It's funny, like Tony was just talking about last week about, how he didn't care for the Mechagodzilla in Godzilla versus Kong. I kind of have a similar reaction to the interpretation of Godzilla in this. Like it's such a radical reinvention of the character that like I almost wish that they had just made it. I don't think it would have had the cultural punch, mind you, but I almost wish it was like a new character, because like the like kind of start like the monster in this almost reminds me as a cross of like the Smog monster from the old Godzilla versus the Smog monster and the Thing, actually, because there's like a body horror element to it. And it's not the dinosaurian Godzilla that I love, and I just have a hard time. And I actually hate the fin lasers and the tail lasers and all that stuff. Like I hate that. But like so it just goes to show you everybody's got a disconnect. But that being said, I can remove myself from those feelings like of like not particularly caring for some of the choices that they made, and still say that this is, I think that everybody who considers himself a Godzilla fan needs to see this at least once, because it is such a unique take and it is such a smart movie. Like even if you just like good science fiction movies, this movie has a lot to offer you.
Wow, thank you very much. Tony, I mean, I'm thinking you've probably got a lot of thoughts about this one.
I do. I think of anybody. Yeah. I actually wrote about this movie for Fantastic Fest for horrormovies.net.
Oh, gosh. Yes. I'm sorry that I haven't read that. So
that's okay. I mean,
I may even have read it, because we're talking about 4 years ago, right? So
yeah.
I may even have read that when
5
that came out.
years ago. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I saw it at Fantastic Fest and really enjoyed it. To your point, though, Drew, that your misgivings about Godzilla, that's partially why it's called Shin Godzilla or Shin Gojira. Is new or next, but it literally means, a lot of times it's for a sequel, but it also can mean new Godzilla. So the idea is, and they've decided not to make Shin Godzilla 2, right? So this Godzilla, we'll see how it goes, but it's gonna stand alone. But I think there's reasons why it is Shin Godzilla, which I think kind of go along with whether you liked it or not. I really enjoy this movie.
And I will say, Tony, I think I a character that has been rebooted as many times as Godzilla, like when I say those things aloud, I feel kind of silly for saying those things.
But it's very purposeful is what I'm saying. Like, you shouldn't feel bad. Like, you like what you like by no means. But I just to add context to it, it's not just Shin Godzilla as in next Godzilla. It's also kind of, I think that it's very pointed. Mm-hmm. The name was very pointed in how their take on it as well. I was surprised when I first saw it. Hideaki Anno, Anno Hideaki, depending on how you want to properly give his name. I've been a fan of his for a long time. Evangelion is a touchstone, which I think most people would know him. But he was an animator on tons of stuff that I loved. Looking through his credits, he animated some of the best sequences in Nausicaa, as well as just doing tons of cool stuff that I enjoy. If anybody is an Evangelion fan, I first saw that. I saw the first 2 episodes or 3 episodes. My friend sent it to me from Japan because he went back and came back. And then the last 2, which if anybody knows that franchise, that is one of the most confusing 5 episodes I've seen ever. Because of just, he was going through depression and it's storied how bizarre the end of that show is. So I think it has a lot of his, if you do know his work, I think it has a lot of its touchstones. But I was most impressed. The thing that, and I want to get into it later, but I was very surprised at how the satire works, that this is probably one of the most anti-bureaucracy, which bureaucracy in Japan is legendary. Mm-hmm. And you'll see it. It's partially parodied in Akira as well, when you see how the politicians are fighting against each other and everything, trying to deal with whatever this psychic thing happens. But both anti just bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake, but also pro-nationalist. Mm. And that's a hard thing to do. Usually you kind of err on like the government sucks, right?
Yeah.
And this has a little bit of each. Like Japan still has to come together. They're being put upon by outside powers. They have to make the right political moves. So in some ways, it's as much of a political potboiler as it is a monster movie. Also, we switched from the horrors of nuclear war or potential nuclear war to the horrors of Fukushima and the tsunami and earthquake that happened. And then, just if I remember correctly, 5 years before. So
yeah, I don't recall, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
And there's scenes that basically kind of mirror some of the footage, the horrific footage. I remember, since I have friends in Japan, just having to look away at some of the news and just the incredible loss of life and how horrible that is, and to have this movie come out so close and kind of bring some of that back is really something else. I mean, everybody had lived that on the news, at least, if not been part of it. So all of that, and so they're dealing with all that disaster, you deal with a certain amount of bureaucracies. I think there's some reaction to that as well, in amongst being I kind of like when it goes off the rails with the insane lasers, and it's just crazy town. Like, I remember that first scene, just everybody in the audience going, whoa.
Yeah, that's how I reacted for sure. I was like, oh my God.
I mean, it just stumbling around and destroying things. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of long-winded, but I really enjoy this movie. I enjoyed it more actually this time. And I'd forgotten like a lot of the little bits that happen. And I think it has a lot of the hallmarks, the director's hallmarks, if you're familiar with his work. And I think that's kind of cool to bring a fresh take. I think it's cool. It's kind of neat as a one-off, as much as I would like to see him direct more Godzilla. Even if we don't get that, I think this is, since it stands alone in the way it is, I'm totally cool with that.
Thank you very much. One thing that I was thinking about the timing that you were talking about, where yes, the Fukushima disaster was in 2011, and this movie is 2016. So yeah, that's a 5 year.
You only get a 5 year distance between.
Yeah, but get this, 1954. This is a characteristic that I think I'm not even qualified to comment on why this is, but the original Godzilla came out in 1954, and that's just 9 years after the atomic destruction of two cities. Already they were taking this national trauma and turning it into a bizarre fantasy nightmare thing. That's wild. I mean, that's like, our huge national trauma, 9/11. I'm trying to imagine if within 9 years or 6 years you had some sort of an atomic monster kind of thing that symbolized 9/11. And I'm having a hard time right now thinking if there's anything that fits that.
The closest thing, I guess, would be Cloverfield, and there were people that were
very good,
pretty critical of that movie.
I mean, everybody always gets real mad when you try to sublimate trauma into art in the United States, whereas it appears, and again, I'm not qualified to comment on this, it appears as though that is more a part of art in Japanese culture. I don't know.
I think this is a discussion that I've been having in a lot of different forms lately, but I think for some reason in the United States, even though monsters are some of the most primal and oldest storytelling devices, we have to see monster, or at least certain facets of the critical community see monsters as something dumb and exploitive, and they can't mean anything deeper. And I don't necessarily think that other cultures have that same. Maybe they do. I'm coming at this from a very Western perspective.
It depends because I was talking. I know just from some of the stuff I've seen, like at Fantastic Fest, Mexico tends to view horror as very lowbrow. Or the not Mexico, maybe the masses, but as far as the government art agencies and important film, critics, etc., tend to view it as lower. I
Well,
know even when they were trying to get some films from Mexico, some horror films, they met some resistance. Like, why would you want to watch this?
Why would you want to dig these up and make archival copies?
Like,
right. Yeah. And one of the difficulties also is that I think audiences, and this certainly includes American audiences, there's this difficulty in thinking on multiple layers at once. It's difficult for us to have something that is both satire and celebration. Like this, you were pointing out brilliantly that this movie satirizes the bureaucracy, but in a sense, it satirizes the bureaucracy in the same way that Star Wars satirizes the Millennium Falcon. That piece of junk is hard to fly, but what great heroes are those who can figure out how to make it work? And so in this, the bureaucracy is a disaster. But there are people within it who can figure out how to rise and how to move within this bureaucracy and somehow get it to move like it's a mech, like it's a giant thing that is very complicated to get to move. Because, I mean, the only alternative to a government made up of people is a government made up of like very few people, and you don't want that. So and so that's really interesting. In other words, I watch this and I don't take it as something so simple as, oh, bureaucracy bad. It's more like bureaucracy can be hilariously not ready for disaster.
Well, and it's so complicated. There's so many layers of people, because honestly, there's not anything, I don't think, in this film where you go, that's just completely incompetent. It's just so complicated. There's so many different people who have, I mean, like the poor, the first prime minister says, well, he's kind of nervous about making this kind of a decision because they're, life and death decisions. He might be killing civilians, etc. And that's a real thing. Like those are going to be complicated things. And then the new guy, all of a sudden he's got to figure out how to have authority, even though nobody respects him.
He's like the Minister of Agriculture.
Exactly.
He's the Prime Minister. Yes.
Well, there is. I mean, the problem is that there is that all of the satire is to hold a mirror to, this is how Japanese bureaucracy works.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm no Japanese political science major, but I know enough from friends of mine who live there and from people who just have to get some things done, like day-to-day taxes and driver's license, and in amongst just all of the stuff and the way their news cycle works as well, that the just sheer frustration of, do we have to have a meeting to talk to the guy who has to have the meeting? The answer normally is yes. And the guy who says, hey, look man, I know where you're coming from, this is how it's done. You really should shut up, because if you want to have a political career, because you're young, and that it's both seniority and as well as this is how we work. And so this holds a mirror to, well, maybe that's not working so well in the face. Like, we can't pivot that well when something's really bad like this happened.
True.
And that's what it's really talking a lot about. But it's just knowing what I know. When I first saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. And to your point though, Julia, I don't think that the male-female split, I think it's changing, but I think that's fairly realistic in what's actually going on.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
In
That's
Japan.
what I'm saying. In Japan, yeah, and then I'm saying it was like that here during the Trump administration too. I mean, there's barely any women, but now we have a lot more women.
Right. Although I like
think,
that the woman in charge of military liaison she's taking no guff.
Oh, she's great. You got to wonder like what that woman's career is like, and how tired she must be of being the only woman in a room full of 60 men in identical white shirts and black ties.
Not only that, but telling the military what to do.
Right. Well, yeah, and she's also she knows not only what the equipment can do, but what the law can do. So they'll be like, there's this great moment early on where they go, can we ask the Americans to shoot this thing? And she goes, we have to act first. She like recites, chapter and verse, and says, we have to act first, and then we could ask after that. So it's interesting stuff. I just want to point out, and then I want to go straight to the stages of Godzilla. But I just want to give sort of my opening thought in like 30 seconds or less. I love this movie. This is probably, I enjoyed this Godzilla movie probably more than I've enjoyed any Godzilla movie in a long time. And I often complain about how Godzilla movies are a lot of people walking around. This movie is mostly people walking around, and yet I loved it. I thought it was hilarious.
This is the Godzilla
and
movie.
fun.
This is the Godzilla movie for people who love West Wing.
Yes, that's true. It is. It's yeah. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah,
And then when
there's
Godzilla
lots of
was
fast talking political types.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And then when Godzilla's on,
That is
terrifying.
the best pocket review I have ever
Yes.
heard of this movie.
That is really good. Yeah, you should put that on something because it's a good movie.
That should be on the Blu-ray package.
The best Godzilla movie for people who love The West Wing. Yes.
I mean,
that's
it's
true.
all there. In fact,
Yeah.
I found it, and I didn't mean to interrupt your opening thoughts, Jason. I'm sorry if I sidetracked it, but there's a lot of subtitles, especially on the Blu-ray. But I told Rain that had you seen the version I saw in the theater, the amount of subtitles to try to keep track of everything was somewhat overwhelming. And this is coming from somebody who watches a lot of subtitled movies.
I've actually heard that
going on the theatrical version because they tried really hard. And I thought that was cool.
Subtitles this time. I actually did the
we
dub
only had the
because
dub,
of that very
so maybe
reason.
I just wasn't able to find the subtitled one. But we only had the dub. And
the last time I watched it, I watched the subtitled version, and I found it similarly overwhelming.
It's in the Funimation Blu-ray, which I actually wish there was a super duper Blu-ray that we could get. They subtitle almost everything, so they'll tell you like what jets they're launching and all where they're located, everything, and that is really cool.
It's super cool, even in the version that we saw. There's nothing that happens that doesn't have a subtitle, almost like in a comic book or a graphic novel where they go, now we're at the Nuclear Regulation Authority, and now we're at now we're at such and such bay, and just great. It makes it kind of documentary-like. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to add, and then let's go into the stages. This is also the first Godzilla movie I've seen in a super long time where I found it really scary. So I loved, I loved just the way the movie worked, but I also loved being like really genuinely frightened by this big monster because you don't know like how in the heck you're going to be able to survive this thing. It's pretty bad.
Well, Rain liked it too, and Rain eschews violence like shooter violence or thriller violence.
Yeah.
But she loves disaster movies.
Oh yeah.
And so she's like, that was a really good disaster movie. That was,
yes,
terrifying. And when you see it, because it just like the first Godzilla, it's just a force of nature.
Yeah. You're going to have a heck of a lot of rebuilding to do, more than you can wrap your mind around. And the amazing thing about the heroism of government is that it works to wrap its mind around, things like that the rest of us would fall away from. That's what government's good at. Even when it's bad, it's better than none. But all right, so let's talk about the stages of this crazy ass monster. There's a name for the first version of Godzilla that pops up, and it is Kamata-kun. And people have stuffed animal versions of it. The creature
it's just so cute and hilarious.
There's some really cute stuff there. Like I've seen some tiny ones.
Oh. I hate that thing so much. Like
it's revolting, isn't it?
I think it's hilarious.
It looks like a toad, and I don't like frogs, and I don't like toads.
All I know is every time it came on the screen, I started cracking up. I was like laughing so hard.
It's so dangerous. Yes,
it's gross. Like it does what it means.
It is definitely gross.
Like the fact that it's got like blood dripping out of its gills, all the time. I guess that's blood. We don't really.
It's some sort of
it's
weird
like how it's
fluid.
transforming. So once it comes out of water, it's got to change, and that part of that change is just that all of that horrible radioactive
goopy
blood
whatever.
and fluid. That I have a friend who has a little tiny stuffed keychain of it because it's all cute.
Lots of people have these stuffed
Googly
guys.
eyes.
This is stuff, though, that you're talking about is why this movie reminds me almost more of, well, first of all, Hidora, the smog monster, who starts out as a tadpole type creature. But
Good
also,
point.
again, the thing, the John Carpenter thing that's this ever adapting. And again, as somebody that has like I guess my headcanon version of what Godzilla should be like, this is what makes this harder for me to, even though again I'm not calling the movie bad, like I have to stress that, but I have a harder time accepting this creature as Godzilla because of this stuff. Even though, yeah, you're right, like by doing this radical reinvention, they are in some ways it seems like once in a blue moon. Most of the Godzilla movies that we get are the Godzilla versus formula, and then once in a blue moon you'll get the movie that like wants to go back to like Godzilla 1985 was another movie like that. And the original, obviously, where they want to go back to the idea of Godzilla as like this horrific metaphor for something. And I respect that and I dig it. It's just like this is so radically different that it could be it could be a completely different character in some ways. And again, when I say this, though, I feel silly because Godzilla has been rebooted so many times and there's so many incarnations. And Godzilla is a bit like Batman in that like every time Godzilla shows up, he's a little bit different. And
yes.
Well, I think that you're not wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. I totally get it. For me, I mean, even the movie itself, they go, hey, so we called it Godzilla, and they go, "Oh, the Americans named it this time," which is also kind of
isn't that wild
to the lizard-like Godzilla, which eventually in Final Wars they go, "That's not a Godzilla."
Yes.
just to take another stab.
They call that creature Zilla, if I recall, right?
Well, no, there's a line where they go, "That's not a Godzilla."
Yes.
Like, ouch. But the way they name it and everything is even supposed to tell you this is not in that universe. This is our own new thing that we know that Americans, that the world loves Godzilla. Like the book I have, we love Godzilla every time.
Yes.
And we're going to help, the Americans are going to name it, and then it gets reverse engineered back to Gojira, because they go, hey, it's like this name on this island.
Isn't that interesting?
And so they basically backfill it to the original name, which is a surprising and very interesting take, in my opinion, on the international success of this, which ties into a lot of the politics that happen as well. And, but I think that everybody who's making this movie knows the things that you're talking about, Drew, and whether or not it works for you, it's kind of, that's where the interpretation happens. And it's fine to not like it. Like I
don't doubt that the people that made this are fans, because like you can tell that right down to like sound effects choices, musical cues, all the library music from old Toho films.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, like it's just like with like the Godzilla King of the Monsters, the American one from a couple of years ago. You can be critical of that movie, and certainly it has flaws, but you can't doubt that the people that made it love that universe, and you can see that with this as well.
Yeah.
Again, it's an excellent movie. Like if I can take myself away from like the stuff that like, okay, as a nerdy, rigid fanboy, like this and this doesn't work for me. I can take myself apart from that and go, yes, but this movie has all this stuff going for it. And and even the stuff that I don't like the different forms of Godzilla, I can tell that there was a lot of thought and craftsmanship in that.
Yeah, the effects are amazing.
Yeah, and very detailed.
And again, scary. Like when this first phase of Godzilla just turns up in the water and comes out and starts moving along a river, it's pushing pieces of the sides of the canal, as well as any boats in there, along as it moves, because it's that long googly-eyed snake version of Godzilla. And by the way, the googly eyes, that's the funniest thing about it to our eyes.
Well, the mouth is hilarious.
Is he looks so funny, but when you think about it, if you look at an eel, it'll have, and that's why there's so many great memes of eels, they have those hilariously big eyes.
Well, I also think I will say that some of the CG is more dodgy than I enjoy, but that's okay. But I really do think they tried to make it like, well, what if there were, what if we're going to do this thing in stages, what would this look like? And it's going to have a little bit of eels. It's going to have, these weird parts. It starts with limbs that are underdeveloped, like its front limbs, even though they don't get really that developed as it progresses. They're completely underdeveloped when it's like that. And when it's pushing all that water, that's still, not to belabor it too much, but that's, like I said, a lot of the news reports from when, waves were coming in from the tsunami part.
That's a
of
really
things.
good point. Yeah. That's the part that's most terrifyingly like it's images of the tsunami. And
it's really like, to do that, you have to really be pushing to deal with some of this. I don't know if we would do that here or not. That's
sometimes I wish we would. And I mention this because I was going back and looking at this review of a random, unimportant Michael Douglas thriller called I think it was called like Don't Say a Word. And it was it came out like the week after 9/11. And I read this review, and the woman reviewing it said, is Paramount out of their freaking mind? This movie's terrifying, and America's not ready for terrifying. And there's a scene in, where a baseball hits a backstop and the whole crowd cringed because we're all traumatized. And I was thinking, well, you're traumatized. I mean, that's...
Well, granted, this is 5 years past. Yeah. And I'm, I want to preface it with saying, I am an American living in America, watching all of this from the news. And so somebody who's experienced that, but, we also, since I had friends there, we gave money for our first album, and I sent stuff to friends of mine who were having, it was just horrific. Right. And so, I came with that perspective, but I'm coming from a perspective of, I was here. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm totally seeing it from a different light than anyone who's experienced any of that or, had family or anything like that. It's just purely, me dealing with it from watching movies and watching the news. Right.
Yeah.
So by no means is it's easy to say, well, I think this or I know that when it's not as personal.
Sure.
But seeing all of that was just, dealing with Godzilla as this force of nature, and kind of bring that into the forefront, I still think was, I don't know if I would make that choice if I was a director.
I mean, I can't even say if it's super popular, other than I know the one that came out in 1954 was super popular. I have no idea how well this one did.
I think it did well.
It
not maybe well enough that they decided not to do a sequel.
It won basically the Japanese equivalent of an Academy Award, though, didn't it?
I didn't look at the popularity of the film. I apologize. I just have no idea.
Well, no, I'm asking Tony.
I can't remember offhand.
We have Google. We can
figure this out. I mean, it won a bunch of awards. Japan Academy Prize.
Well, so if that's the case, that means there's a contingent of people who thought that was appropriate.
One picture of the year.
This was a box office success.
So there we go. And my point is, there's a large contingent of people who represent the vanguard of the culture who say, yes, it is acceptable to take a national trauma and turn it into a phantasmagoric nightmare of a giant monster. That is how we approve of dealing with trauma that way. And I'm not saying that that's right or it's wrong. I'm saying it's interesting, and I sometimes I wish that we would do it more. That is super interesting. I don't know what it would look like. I don't know what turning American trauma into fantasy would look like, but I know that it's interesting.
And my other thing though is it's also very much a satire of international politics.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first saw it, and because the Americans come in, take a bunch of the samples, tell Japan to burn the rest of them, most likely so that we could, if this was reality, so we could have the patents on all of this.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
And that's exactly
and our weapons are like
we would do that.
Super badass as opposed compared to theirs. The weapons are kind of puny, and then our weapons are like blow the crap out of everything.
That's part of the reality of it, though, because the true politics of it is that the defense force is there as a peacekeeping force
Yeah.
Post-war, that's a real thing. And it's also there's a lot of, you can read and discuss that for probably, you could do a whole podcast on the post-World War II Japanese Defense Force and how all of that military stuff works.
One of the things, though, about the American weaponry that I do think is really interesting about this movie is that as powerful as this version of Godzilla is, it still feels mortal because they make it bleed, and
Yes.
I think that's real. Like, you don't see that very much. Like I think the last time I saw Godzilla actually bleed was probably some of the late 70s movies.
85, when they're shooting with the cadmium bombs.
Oh, that's true. But I think about like the Millennium Godzilla and the MonsterVerse Godzilla, who just basically tank their way through everything, and it's an interesting, both choices have their merits, but I think for this movie that was the right choice.
Well, that's also why that's part of the thing, is it only works for a little bit, and that's only because they're using basically bunker buster bombs that are meant to penetrate into the ground and deploy their payload into deep underground. That's fascinating that we, again, America launches those before Japan knows that they're launched.
Yes.
All of that stuff is exactly what we would do.
My point about that, though, is that because this isn't a monster versus monster movie, the fact that they show that human-made weaponry can have an effect, and then humans are the ones that come up with the solution at the end of the movie. Like, it's a good storytelling device. It's a shorthand for saying, like, as powerful as this thing is, and it's really powerful, it's still something that human intelligence can possibly overcome given time.
And studying it, because the creature quickly evolves into a walking Godzilla that we kind of recognize like Godzilla.
Although it's sort of the zombified Godzilla. And although somebody told me, and Tony, correct me if this is not right, because like I will defer to you ultimately with Godzilla matters, but his head kind of looks like a mushroom cloud, and I think that's a cool visual cue.
Sort of, yeah. I've seen that, and I've seen kind of allusions to that, and allusions to that. And I would agree. I haven't really read much about that.
I wouldn't have noticed it if somebody else hadn't pointed it out to me.
No, I've seen it, and I remember it from when it first came out, but I never really thought as much about it as I did just all the other crazy things, like when he breathes fire, his jaw splits.
Like a vampire from a Guillermo del Toro movie.
Yeah. So in fact, we should talk about what this because I want to get to the weaknesses of the creature, meaning literally the weaknesses that they learn to exploit. But before that, his weaponry is just astonishing. There's the physical size of him, which is very big and very dangerous because he walks on buildings. Okay. But Jesus Christ, when he starts, Tony, explain to us the vomitous fire breathing that Godzilla does, because it's wild.
Well, it's crazy. And also, by the way, this design with its, his nuclear fission that is coursing through his body and his fins dissipating that. They've talked about the dissipation thing before, but it's never been like this. This is probably also, I kept thinking about it in context of the show, the closest to lava shark of any creature we've seen. Where he's constantly, part of his cooling is all of that heat dissipation that constantly flows through these red that turn purple when he goes ham on the shooting lasers and stuff. That, and in fact he has to like cool down one time as he's evolving.
A couple times. When he first turns into the big Godzilla, he walks back into the ocean and he stays there for a while, and then he comes back out again, and then
he has to sleep to regenerate. Like he has to like hibernate.
It starts. What's crazy is it would be fine. Like it would meet expectations if he just spouted that insane gout of nuclear fire that he spouts.
Yes.
Which is just a volume. And it's interesting because, normally we see this kind of Godzilla ray of fire.
Yeah.
Less so in the original, but it becomes this, to the point where he uses it in one movie to fly because it's shooting straight down like a rocket. It's very much like a rocket laser, of fire. And it depends on, which version of you're watching. But this starts as how flamethrower napalm fire works. So it's volumetric. It fills a space.
Yeah.
The way that really bad weaponry, like flame weaponry, works.
Well, and what's crazy is he can control whether he's doing that or the lasers out of his mouth. How is he controlling that? Like, how does he go? Is it like when you swallow versus breathe? Like you just have a way, like your throat just knows what to close and what to open so that you can shoot fire versus lasers?
Well, it evolves. I mean, the whole thing is it evolves. So as
but he does both at the same time. He does the fire and the lasers alternating, like in the same
right.
scene.
But he evolved into the kind of laser version. Because they even talk. Eventually, he evolves so that the way he's controlling the lasers is he's got like a phased array radar, so he knows where everything is around him, and he's just slicing it.
It's crazy.
I loved just everybody in the theater was one of those holy crap, like pin drop moments. At the point where you go, wow, okay, he's shooting nuclear fire. Oh, it looks a little bit different. Oh my goodness, it's just flowing through the city. And then it turns into laser. And not just that he's shooting them from his mouth, but from all of his spines.
Yeah, his whole spine, and then eventually his tail.
He shoots down one B-52 and you're
all
like,
that,
oh, wow.
To me was like, it's too, like, I don't know. It takes me out of the movie because it feels... You brought up like him using his atomic breath to fly. Like it feels almost more like something from like that era if they had been able to do that, where the rest of this movie plays it so seriously. And
I have total respect for that, but it's funny to me that that's the bridge too far.
I'm in the same boat.
I feel stupid. I feel stupid when I say these things aloud. Because there's so many different versions of Godzilla, and I'm certainly not telling anybody, like, if somebody's like, oh, Drew, I don't see why that, I love that. Well, I mean, Tony's just saying he loved that part. You're not wrong for loving that part. Like it's okay. Like it is just like a personal thing with me. I will say that I think that it's interesting because like this Godzilla is like constantly glowing like under his skin, and they kind of went back in the new Monsterverse version. They kind of borrowed from that for the version in Godzilla versus Kong, where he's got this sort of underlayer glow going on. And it just goes to show you the influence of this movie is going to be far-reaching on other versions of Godzilla.
I do find it fascinating, though, that a Godzilla that dances, pretty good movie. Godzilla shooting lasers.
It's a tonal thing, though. Like if the back lasers and a dancing Godzilla had been in the same movie, I probably would be okay with it because it's such an over the top thing, and the rest of this movie is trying to play it pretty I hate realism. I just made a post about this on Twitter today. But
I mean, to an extent, though, part of that is what makes it really cool is the notion that this thing is deviant. I mean, it shouldn't exist. This isn't like some lost creature that we've just
it was created by eating atomic waste.
So and that's why why is it leaking, and why isn't it very efficient, and why is it ugly and sometimes cute? That's why it's efficient. Is that we screwed up and we created this terrible thing. And what's ugly is that when you create a monster that is occasionally beautiful, then you make a mockery of beauty, because it is your sin on display, and sometimes it's beautiful and sometimes it's funny, and it's always awful, and it shouldn't exist.
Matt Frank and I were talking about the design of Godzilla in this, and he made a very...
Oh, really?
Even though I am not a fan of it, he made a very good case for it by saying that it does he says everybody calls it the zombified Godzilla.
Say more about that. Why did they say that? I just want to understand.
Because it kind of looks undead. Like it doesn't look quite right.
The eyes and the teeth and everything.
And it seems like it's got a very, like I think about like Godzilla's personality in other movies. Like this one seems like it's got a sort of malevolent intelligence.
Yeah.
Almost like a Christopher Lee Dracula at times, but like the case that Matt made for it, and I think it's an excellent point, is, and if Matt listens to this, if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, please, I'm sorry. He talked about it looking like a burn victim, and how that's like appropriate for the origins of Godzilla. And if you look at like the first two black and white Godzilla movies, like Godzilla wasn't this like handsome draconian creature that he evolved into over the course of the many movies that he has now been in. And in some ways, this is closer to the horrific Godzilla of 1954. And that's an excellent point. Like I can't, as much as I prefer the like reptilian, large dinosaur interpretation, I can't really argue around that. Like, even the day that we were discussing, like I had to concede. I was like, yeah, that is a very good point. So, and I hope I'm stating this all right, because I don't want to be, like, I'm sorry if I'm misphrasing. Like,
but that sounds fascinating. No. Well, I mean, I can't say whether you are, but it sounds brilliant on both of your parts.
Oh, I mean, he thinks about Godzilla on a level that's most cannot. Like he's very
right.
Yeah, this is true. I thought I knew Godzilla things, and then I met Matt and talked to Matt and was like, I know more than a lot of people, but not.
Can you imagine
like
what it would be like to be that guy and listen to people? That's why I can't imagine him.
Aren't
Well,
you
I've hung out
kind of
with
that guy
con,
with
so
Dracula, though, Jason?
I am, and sometimes, although there is often huge gaps in my knowledge, but it can be tough, and you have to listen with grace. Like there are sometimes people who will write in and go, "Hey, how come you never mentioned that Milton Subotsky was the guy who founded Amicus? And he was really important." And I'm always like, maybe we didn't get to it, or maybe we didn't know, or who knows. But it's like, so that, that person who knows everything about Amicus, they're tearing their hair out as they listen, going, mention Milton Subotsky, and so I imagine it must be like that, where you.
We have dealt with, like, I think you and I dealt with somebody we were talking to, and we had a pitch for something, and they go, Dracula can't do that. And we're like, well, here's the 4 other movies. Funny thing,
right.
That same person who we had to deal with that also gave me a bunch of notes on Godzilla for another design. And I had to actually gracefully go, that's wrong, and here's why.
Right.
And actually I just gave a list, like, not to be snarky, but when you say these things, this is why.
I mean, the funny thing, Tony, about that is that humility is hugely important, because a producer can always go, look, whatever you're going to tell me about how many times this has happened, I just got to say, I'm not going to approve this, because I don't like it when the sausage section comes away from the Enterprise. I don't care how many times they did it, whatever.
Right.
And that's a choice.
You just described how I feel about the the tail laser and everything.
Right. But, that is a different thing, though, from being a smug asshole about it. That's
I freely admit that it's all just opinion and what works for you. Like, here's the thing, like when you're talking about a character that has been around as long as Godzilla has, and this is true of like Superman, it's true of James Bond, like, just these characters, that Dracula, decades and decades of lore behind them. Basically, what you boil down to is choices.
Right.
And some choices you enjoy more than others.
Right. And when you get to wield some power, then you get to say, all right, my Superman is going to have a suit that's impenetrable because it was made from the blanket that he came in. Whereas another person, my Superman, his suit gets torn up because I like it when you can draw Superman with a torn up suit. And that's, hey, go crazy, man. That's why there's multiple universes to deal with.
I don't want to belabor it too much, but I do one thing that I see it, Drew, and then sorry, Julia, I just the thing that I keep coming back to, and again, if this doesn't work for you, that's fine. It's absolutely like, but the reason that a lot of this happens is because, well, A, it's, Shin Godzilla, New Godzilla, but B, it's evolving into this perfect organism. They keep going over that as this is something we've never seen, and we've never seen something evolve this way. This is why it works for me. Let's put it this way. And the fact that, hey, this is cool. What if it had these phased array lasers? But that is really expensive for its nuclear batteries, for lack of bio batteries. All of that stuff. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But it works for me because they keep going back to, look, this is a Godzilla we've never seen before. This is a Godzilla that's constantly changing. And this is a thing that is so overwhelmingly destructive. We have no hope of ever fathoming or destroying it because we can't do that.
That's basically what I was going to say is no matter the idea is that the more stuff you add, the more terrifying it is because you can't beat it. I mean, like the fact is you see him, you see he starts out being extremely dangerous because of how big he is and how he moves. So he's just crushing everything, piling up all these boats and vehicles in front of him so that everything is being destroyed. That's number one. Then you have once he can walk, he can step on things, and fall on things and knock them over with his arms. Then you have, now he's got fire breath so he can burn things, set them fire. But once he has lasers coming out of everywhere, he can reach really, really far and cut buildings and freaking stealth bombers in half with his laser. That is not a thing you can beat at this point. So no matter what, it's like everything. No matter how much we've advanced with our weaponry and our strategies and whatever, you can't beat him. He is a monster, and so. I think it's valid to continue to evolve him to have even crazier powers because it makes him that much scarier. It's not just regular scary, it's like terrifying.
Even to the end when they, skipping ahead, by the end they go, so we have like 3,260 some odd days before we have to deal with this again, we think, right? And they go, yeah, I guess they're gonna have to figure out what to do with it. As far as we can tell, not a dead Godzilla in the middle of.
No, he's just frozen. Well, but see, because he's evolving again, he's evolving again, little creatures are coming out of him. Frozen creatures are coming out.
Holy crap.
Other stuff's going to happen. So you cannot beat him.
Godzillas.
Oh my God. Those are so let's come back to that in a moment because I want to talk about this big plan they come up with when they realize that that the one thing that is going to enable them to come up with an Act 3 for this picture is that Godzilla shuts down periodically to replenish his power. So he just goes to sleep periodically. And they actually like moonshot scientists, they even manage to make estimates for like literally how long it's going to take. But before we get to the plan, I want to say I love the nerds in this. There's the bureaucracy, and then there's a room full of nerds that our main guy, Rando Yaguchi, he is the one dude who really seems capable of one day controlling the bureaucracy this country.
That's part of the point and how radical this is. And it leads back to, if you read, some of the student protests and artist protests and unions and stuff like that, where people were protesting against various stages. There was a huge studio protest and stuff that happened. But this cutting through that bureaucracy, where so much of so many things are so rigid. When he gives everyone and says, look, it's a flat system, I just need everybody to solve problems, gives them a freedom not really afforded to most like a corporate environment or in a political environment. That's what he's saying is the way we're going to get past all of this is if we ditch some of this stuff and actually allow everyone to actually solve the problems without having to worry about, should I speak up or not? But even in that, if you'll notice, some people get really annoyed when people are speaking up, or is it your turn? Or the one guy who's just still pretty sexist about it. and has
And
to
Yeah.
apologize.
that's
But he's
always
a
going to be
jerk.
the case
Yeah.
in any bureaucracy, is that you're going
Right.
to have the people who are like, no, only I get to talk, no matter who you are.
What's interesting about this, though, especially with, again, looking at this through the lens of the last year in America,
Mm.
is that, Jason, earlier you're talking about like government is, there is heroic aspects of this government, but the real heroes of this movie are scientists.
Yes.
And
Amen to
like
that.
they are constantly kind of being scoffed at by aspects of the government, but they continue going on and doing
Yes.
what they're supposed to do.
No, yeah, you're
And
so right that's exactly what we've been dealing with here.
Also,
Yep.
watching it this year, may I just point out that in the year 2016, because I went to Japan. I guess it was 2009, 2010 when I went to Japan. In the year 2016, we see a Japan where tons of people are wearing masks, as they did when I was there, not because it's a political statement, before a pandemic, but because that's what you do when you don't want to get other people sick and you give a crap about your fellow humans.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's not political, that it's a day-to-day thing, that it's happening when everybody's in the shelters, etc., is just another one of those things that I watch and go, because my friend gave me some masks. Actually, he's like, hey, you're going back home on a plane, here's some masks, like if you want to keep yourself and others safe, like you don't have to use them. But you would see, like, I would walk and people have to go to work, like it's such a thing that it was normalized.
We had an opportunity to make it normalized in the United States, and we just had.
And I don't want to get too much into that. Some people may have turned off the podcast right now, but just this, like, watching that again, like you watch movies based on, I'm going to go back to it, what you bring into the tree, like Empire Strikes Back, right?
Yes.
So watching this again, and I see it all the time, and commented on it. A friend of mine actually, before COVID, talked a lot about, she would wear a mask, like, to the studio when we had to animate and everybody was working, sleeping at the office and stuff like that. She was didn't feel good, so she would do that, and then people were like, huh? But it's just, we're one of the few places where that's, you just do it because you don't want to get other people sick.
Yes.
And you don't know what else is going on, and at this time, like, there's radiation, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But watching that again, I was really reminded of,
it's shocking. I mean,
goobity goo. Like,
we did have a chance, and we screwed that up because of political reasons. People decided there were powers in this country that decided that it would be not helpful to them politically to get behind mask wearing, and so we lost the opportunity to encourage people to do it.
I mean, I've been talking about it for years, just of like, hey, that's a really considerate thing to do, but the rampant.
But you would have to, if it was new to people, you would have to teach them to do it. Sure. And if our leaders fail to teach, then nobody learns. And that's, so it just didn't happen.
I don't mean to
could have happened.
I don't mean to get too far again. Like, if somebody turned it off and like, oh, there's Tony again.
No, you're not wrong. I'm just saying that
something I noticed while I was watching.
This is also a very political movie, so I think it's completely okay to talk about political stuff.
There's nothing inherently evil about the United States that we wouldn't be able to learn that lesson. It just so happens that our leaders failed to teach it. We didn't. We don't
normalize it normally. Again, like that's what struck me when I was there, years and years and years ago, was just how, like, we don't really do that as much.
We can normalize anything if we set our mind to it. Because
everybody is like, because like, you're not staying home sick because you have to work, and that's the work ethic there. But on trains, on the where you see everybody crossing in those huge crosswalks, right? Like, you see footage of that all the time. Just that the day to day of how different that was. And I remarked, Ray and I talked about it at the time, but now, this year especially, was like, wow, I wonder how different it would be if that was there. And you see this in when everybody's in a shelter, you see it even more, and this is 5 years ago. And it's just normal. It's just
in this country, it's been amazing that just through communication, we have managed to make it so that most people don't smoke anymore. We managed to make it so that people drive with a safety restraint, seatbelt. So you can do it. It can be done. We just fucked it up. We just didn't do it. We could have done it.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
And like I said, I don't. It's probably
don't
something where some
feel
people get
I mean,
offended,
I don't
but it
care
just
if we
struck me as a
offend
thing.
people by saying that they should have a
care
have,
about other people and
care
not
about other
want
people.
to not want to kill people. Exactly.
I don't give a shit if that offends.
Or just in this case, just don't give them a cold or a flu
Or
Right.
a Godzilla.
Right.
or a Godzilla-born illness, I guess.
But yeah, I mean, this is clearly something that I really believe. I do believe that Americans can be quite exceptional, and so I think we could have been exceptional here, and we didn't because we had extraordinarily poor leadership, and that's
now
what
we're
happened.
being exceptional with the vaccine distribution. So yeah.
Right, and our leadership there actually did pour money into that, so there was an opportunity there. We just fucked it up. Anyway, on we go. We're gonna hear about that.
Whatever,
That's
you
that's
can
fine.
blame me. It just was something I noticed.
No, it's well said.
Absolutely.
Going through this past year, I am aware, and even older movies now, I think I watch and go, oh, they're hugging, or they're, it's so weird to see.
Yeah,
But-
like,
Yeah.
you're so close, like, and that's what it's done, and it's so bizarre, but
But going back, I want to go back to what Drew was saying about the scientist thing, because it's not just, yes, it's absolutely been true in the last year and in the last few years, but it's been in the last decade or two with the climate change and all that, where
Sure.
that's the whole thing with Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, that we're like, no, we don't really want to change our behavior, so let's just pretend that there's nothing, that we're not affecting the environment, or no, we don't really want to change our behavior, so let's pretend that guns aren't the problem, or whatever. It's like all these things, and that's exactly what's going on here, is that they're like, no, we don't want to change our behavior, so it can't be that we've created a creature. It's like, that's
Well,
That's true.
yeah,
You're
like,
missing the other half of the equation, is that yes, and this is my optimism in the world. Yes, we treat the scientists poorly, but they are there, and we do actually give them money, and they do actually come up with a way to shoot coagulant down Godzilla's throat
But again, I think that's actually part of the fiction, because in real life, they'd be like, oh, okay, maybe he was right that one time, but still we should focus on weapons and not worry
I don't know
about,
what to tell you. I mean, the vaccine came from somewhere, right?
Off, though, like, that all goes away. Now, granted, at the beginning of this, the political drama part, you do see the three main scientists that they've brought in, and they're of an older generation.
Yeah.
So everybody at first just kind of sits around, because that's what you do, because you're feeling each other out, and nobody wants to speak up and call somebody out. Like, why don't you believe the science?
Yeah.
And so it starts, again, the satire is amazing, because you start with these three older guys who are like, no, it can't be this. Like, I don't know. And none of them really want to be there.
Right.
And
they don't say anything useful at all. Nothing.
But they also don't want to overstep. But that's the thing, is they're in this political realm where they don't want to call out anybody.
Right.
Rain was reading actually a really fascinating thing about how, I forgot what country it was, but they had a really bad airplane disaster. And what they found was the co-pilot, the original training, I wish I could remember this book she was reading. The original training was it was harder to, even under pressure, call out your superior and say, no, I think this is
Black
really bad.
Box.
And they had to train people to go, no, under these circumstances, everyone should listen, and everyone should be, we can't have more disasters like this. And so but these guys are dealing with something similar in the political realm, where they're like, the scientists come in like, oh, we're doing this. So it takes this next generation coming in and going, everything's on the table. Let's really think about this. And how excited they get when they realize, because the guy who may or may not also be part of creating this Godzilla, because he was angry that his wife died of radiation sickness or cancer, wouldn't get help for any of her cancer. He disappears at the beginning. We don't, because it's that's what's intriguing. It's also part thriller, where, like, what happened to this guy? What did he leave behind? How do we figure this out? they start having to call in favors from various countries. All that stuff is, just some pop. This could be some other non-monster thing, right? And that would be still a really good political drama. But in this case, it's a Godzilla, and how do you figure out how to defeat one?
Yeah.
Well, all I could think about in the early parts of this movie is the pandemic. Like
Sure.
watching it this time, and it's and I think that's great that a movie that's satirizing the Japanese government can still work just as well for a whole other nation.
It's interesting because I actually didn't really think about the pandemic. I was thinking about tornadoes because I was when he first is just like walking through, and you're just like, wow, if you happen to be the unlucky people who live in the path that he's walking through right now, your house is destroyed, but all the houses around you are fine.
Yeah.
Well, I'm more talking about the way that the bureaucrats in the government react.
But I'm just saying, I think it's
stuff.
interesting that that's kind of where I went.
But my attitude,
human nature has it that even later on, you see lanes and lanes of traffic and people shopping
and people jogging in the park. I love that.
We just, as we've seen, we kind of fill the space of how we feel, how we compartmentalize, and that's part of how our brains work and why we don't just shut down completely and lay there.
I mean, I gotta say, having worked in cable TV for like 25 years, my feeling about government and about all this stuff and dealing with pandemics and everything is just like with cable TV. There's so much going on. There's so many people. It's a miracle that any of this stuff works. All right, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that we haven't blown ourselves up yet. And so. To me, our terrible grades in this great exam is actually a testament to how amazing it is that we have not destroyed ourselves. Well, and so I feel basically
also, and we're not even dealing with Godzilla,
right? Exactly.
Yet.
I think it's also, another part we haven't discussed is, what thrusts us into the third act is America finally plays its hand and goes, okay, so you guys aren't really dealing with this right. And this comes into part of the nationalist part too, because America forces and goes, so we're going to nuke it if you can't. And Japan goes, well, they can't really tell us to do this, but they're kind of telling us to do this. And we get the impression that they're going to do it anyway. So let's figure out what we need to do. And so the part that leads in the third act.
Yeah, if you've got a bully, you better make sure they're on your side.
And it takes, again, the West Wing side of this, it takes them actually going to different partners internationally to go, hey, we think we have this thing, but we need more time.
We need to buy time.
And so figuring out that, and in some ways, maybe America is justified. Like, hey, we don't want a Godzilla coming on the West Coast, right? And that's what's really driving it. But also, again, we can make America in this movie can make those demands because they're not nuking America. And when they say, well, we would do the same thing if it was New York. The guys in Japan are like, sure. Okay.
I can't say. We might. Right. I mean, according to the
but Japan goes, well, but it's not happening in New York.
It's not happening. Yeah.
And all of that stuff is actually, again, it doesn't have to be a Godzilla, but the fact that it is a Godzilla makes it awesome. And that's what makes, I'm going along with Drew. And we said this before. It's kind of crummy when people think that monsters or these kinds of tales are beneath us when if it was, Michael Douglas and somebody else in something that wasn't a Godzilla, oh, that's a political potboiler thriller. But add a Godzilla to the West Wing, and all of a sudden, like, silly monster.
Well, I mean, all I can say is that some people just lack imagination. I mean, in the same way that there's uneducated assholes who won't watch anything that's in black and white, there are overeducated assholes who won't watch anything that isn't concrete, and that's just the way they are.
What I think is odd about the critical community is that they have now been trained to a point where, like, if it is like a Lord of the Rings movie or a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie, they can review that without like the cringy eye-rolling jackassery. But if it's a monster film, suddenly like it has to be dumbed down.
That's interesting.
And it can't be, there can't be anything to it, even though monsters are some of our oldest storytelling devices.
I mean,
And
I
a
haven't
lot-
read enough criticism of monster movies in the past. I'm going to take your word on that, because I don't know if that's. I know that people have written a lot of really highfalutin stuff about The Walking Dead. I know that, but that might be the exception that proves the rule. I mean,
Well, I've seen what Drew's. I mean, I see less of it, luckily, but it also I just really dislike also when I've seen directors and people in horror all making the same, like, well, I don't really make horror movies.
oh, jeez, yes.
And you want to just like, to everybody else you are. So give me a break and just own up to it. I hate that so much.
So interesting thing, Tony, based on that I've been thinking about in the past week, is this curious phenomenon, and I believe that it's not necessarily anybody's fault. I think you write a book or a movie, you release it. You're required to say marketing-y stuff about it. Sometimes you have no idea what to say. And curiously, the dumb thing that a lot of people do say, and I really believe it's because you're required to say something, is, well, I really thought that there's never really been a smart version of this, or it was time to like really take the Riddler and really kick him up a notch, or whatever. And you're insulting everybody who's come before you, but you got to say something. And so they always say this thing where nobody's really thought about this before. And then there's a bunch.
To be fair, I think we all do that. Every time we make a statement about something, we're going to try to set it aside from. If you're applying for a job, you have to try to set yourself aside from other people.
Right.
Like, what's the point? Why should you hire me? So we're kind of always doing that. Of going, well, the reason I'm talking right now is because I have something new to say that hasn't been said, even though there's nothing new under the sun.
It's not really true. Right. But I think about that all the time, because sometimes people get themselves in super trouble. Like some more, exactly what you're talking about, Tony. Somebody will come out and go, yes, a bunch of romance writers have covered this topic in the past, but nobody who's really a serious writer. And then a whole bunch of people will go, oh, hold on a second. And,
yeah. I just think there's room for all of it. Or for example, why is Black Mirror, for example, some like, whoa, which, it is done really well, but where the humans are the monsters, but somehow if it was monsters, oh man, it doesn't have the same impact to some people. And, that's because, maybe it's because there has been so much, what people think of as B-movie horror or whatever. I think we shed light on some of that.
Also, right. Everything is, unfortunately, there's timing, there's, just reading the room. It might be the year to do Black Mirror, and then next year you could have come out with it not existing before, and everybody's like, ho hum. You could.
I got you. I think it's done really well, but the way people compartmentalize it, going back to what Drew's saying, has always baffled me, because you go, well, I don't, I think this other stuff is just as poignant and well written. Maybe, and some of it's not as well written, because that stuff. Although I tend to watch less and less of it because it's just too close. It's another one of those things. That show in particular is like way too real.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people find it
on a lot of episodes
quite distressing.
With Godzilla, I think that with Godzilla in particular, I think there is a snobbery because of, people think of it as this franchise that's about people in rubber suits.
Right. Well, also,
that's stupid.
I don't think Mystery Science Theater, as much as I love to watch the Criterion version and the MST version, I think the advent of that as a phenomena,
that's possible.
Definitely, I don't want to blame. I enjoy the show, but the fallout from it has been that, let me laugh at this, because and some of it's stuff that maybe you should laugh at, and maybe you have your friends around, you riff on it, right? Like I enjoy that show a lot, and I think it's fun and funny, and I watch it all the time. But part of that post MST, and still making it, but that, like, hey, let's just take these old Godzilla movies and say funny stuff, I think that hasn't helped. As people, grew through monster movies. And, some people, and that, if that's what you want to do. I'm not telling you, that that's wrong, but people view it with that lens, I think, unfairly in a lot of ways.
And it's
especially since they're not watching
the
the subtitled version. And that, oh man, that sounds so pretentious. But the original versions are cut differently. And some of them even have, look, Jet Jaguar is still Jet Jaguar, right? Like, it's ridiculous. It's a robot who taught himself to grow. Like, right. I still enjoy it, but there are some times where that stuff is more serious without the jokes, added to it. And I think that it adds that's hokey kid stuff it legitimizes that side of things when, and some of it is, right? But I've seen that phenomena happen more and more.
Something that's silly. Like,
sure, of course.
Let's also, like, and I think you can review something through that lens and say, Godzilla versus Megalon has, some silly stuff in it, but isn't there some like the fight choreography is interesting. Like, I just feel like that criticism has gotten to a point, and not with this movie, because this movie is normally well reviewed. So sure. We're not really talking about this one. But I feel like that when I look at a movie, especially when we're talking about a movie for the podcast, I've gotten to the point where I look at it and I go, okay, I don't like this, and this about it, but I like this, and this about it. Whereas I feel like the sort of like rise of like hate watching and like snarky clickbait reviewing and things like that, I feel like that sort of criticism that has real heart behind it and actual thought behind it and some sort of level of balance, like that's becoming a lost thing. And with the Toho universe of all these characters, like when you watch all these movies, particularly if you've been watching them since you were a kid, you're emotionally invested in it. And I know, Tony, you feel the same way. Is like, Godzilla movies are occasionally serious, but occasionally silly. And I love that. But like when one comes along that is serious, like this one, I familiarized myself enough with the history of the character that I can go, okay, this isn't the Godzilla that's on Mars and doing a victory dance, and, and that's fine. And there's room for both, but
I think that was Planet X, actually.
Wasn't it? They were fighting. All I ever know is they were fighting King. It was him and Rodan, and
they took him. Didn't they take Godzilla in a big like anti-grav egg that they carried under a flying saucer?
And I love that. I love that.
It's great. But I mean, especially because this, Shin Godzilla has zero monster wrestling.
Yes,
no,
because there's a lot of monster wrestling in Megalon.
It's so funny to think about this stuff because it reminds me, the long-running series, the James Bond series, right? We've spent so much time bellyaching over the past like 10 years, ever since Daniel Craig came along, about how finally James Bond is being treated seriously in the new geopolitical blah, 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 about what is essentially a series about a super spy who like beds women and blows up planes. I mean, it's essentially, it's just it's still a comic book. It's still, it just troubles me, Drew. You and I were talking on Twitter this week, and let's not belabor this. We can take it offline. But it just troubles me that people go out of their way to try to figure out a way they can forgive themselves from watching James Bond. Just watch James Bond. You don't have to grease it so hard. It's just James Bond. It's just Superman. It's just Godzilla. Like, we don't have to convince ourselves that we're not wasting our lives. Our lives will be wasted. Death will come. Watch James Bond. There's no point to this conversation about is my time being well spent? No, most likely no. Anyway, so
it also depends on what you think of as well spent.
Is not being well spent.
Right, well said. Maybe it is. Who knows? I can't say. You can ask me when I die. Tony, I interrupted you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying that it's up to you to decide whether that time was well spent.
Right.
And my hope is that more people allow themselves the freedom of, especially when things are stressful and crazy and unprecedented, that
Well
You
said.
know, it's fine to just don't even worry. Is it well spent? Who the hell knows?
Who knows?
I mean, I know I should be, for example, I should be working more on music.
Mm.
And this week, since I've been watching in Rain, I probably should have spent more time on bass and less time watching Marvel movies with Rain.
Mhm.
However, the time that we've spent together watching Marvel movies is also nice.
It's so special,
Because
Tony.
we hung
it's so
out
important.
and watched that.
Yeah.
So objectively, I should be trying to finish a new Deserts of Mars album.
Mm.
I know that.
Yeah, this is my life. What you're
as-
saying, like every single day,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, there's so many things I should be doing that I'm not doing, and then if I stop and give myself credit, I go, or Jason or somebody else gives me credit. They're like, well, look what you have done. And it's like, okay, yeah, no, I have done some things, but still, there's so many things I should be doing that
Yeah.
aren't the thing.
But
Yeah.
also, I wish more people gave themselves I get to decide what is valuable for my time, and will concern myself less, and hopefully people give me less flack for how society thinks I should be spending that time.
Well, and
And
also
those are
just the
questions.
idea that not all your time needs to be spent the most valuable way. I mean, if you want to waste time playing computer games or watching TV without even spending time with your significant other, whatever, it's still a choice that you get to make, and you can forgive yourself because you don't always
Sure.
have to be using your time wisely.
Actually, Rain was reading some stuff, and I that a lot of time, especially for creatives, and I can't this isn't just me justifying like what I should be writing this album, but they've proven that those times away from just at your writing or playing, etc. Most people need that just because you think of things differently. So you need that time,
or you're just
away
recovering, or you're
yeah.
grieving, or whatever, processing. I mean, it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't, we have to forgive ourselves when we don't maximize our productivity all the time.
Well, with this movie, I think also like this particular incarnation of Godzilla, I think it was useful for me for processing some of my feelings about the last year. Watching again, I enjoyed watching this movie the most out of the 3 times that I've seen it this time, and I think that's why. It's because like I had it helped me, and this is why I think monsters are wonderful metaphors, because like it helps, and why I don't think it's a waste of time, because it helps me emote in ways that I wouldn't emote otherwise. And so, and like because this isn't a monster versus monster movie, science saves the day at the end, or does it? That's a whole other question.
Right.
But science, we use science to rise above an impossible situation. There's something uplifting about that.
Well, even back to the nationalists. But what happens is, what's really interesting is international pressure forces Japan and its plucky politicians and its new politicians, who are just as ineffectual, but realize it by the time they need to, because by the end they go, hey, everybody's got to resign because that was the interim government, which there's a lot of shake up in Japanese politics if you follow it even tangentially. International pressure, an actual nuke to bring it back to 54 Godzilla is the threat. So everyone has to pull together. They have to pull some favors from China to get this coagulant produced. They have to find, places to, hey, all the factories have to make this thing. So Japan pulls itself together in the end, despite its bureaucracy, to get to even when Godzilla wakes back up and they go, well, he just wiped out everyone in Team A. Get back in there and fill him full of more coagulant,
Yeah.
Again, super dangerous. Everyone, all of the stuff where you see, tanks
amazing, isn't
getting
it?
destroyed and everything, everybody's pulling together to try, despite the pressure, it's still, Japan has to take care of itself, and here's how we're going to do it.
And that kind of heroism is real.
Sure.
There are plenty of examples in real life where people did exactly that. The first wave is gone. The second wave is coming. And Yeah.
Heck,
Tony,
we
you
did.
were
That
gonna.
is a good. That is a good thing to like into this past year because that is exactly what's happened in the hospitals. You have all these poor, exhausted healthcare workers who have just had to be on for like several days in a row without resting at all, and then you got the next wave of people doing the same thing and just going in and out. So that's another one.
And it's taking a toll, and they
Yep.
can't see their family, and people.
They're dying.
Again, I'm always, there is plenty of failure, but I'm always thrilled at the heroism and Tony, I had a note that you wanted to say something about the design, but did you already get to say it, or
Oh
was there something
yeah. I
you
was
wanted to
just
circle back on?
we can cut actually that little part because I just was in the chat. Drew was talking. I didn't want to interrupt him.
Yeah. No
So you
worries.
can trim this. I was just saying, hey, when you're through, I want to finish. But yes, I did.
Got it. Well, cool. We should probably wrap up because I know that we've been at this for a while. But boy, what a wonderful, wonderful discussion of Shin Godzilla. I just am so thrilled.
Oh, you know what's something that's amazing that I really think. So 5 years out from when this movie originally was made, as a ally, as a friend. I think that where it posits that in the near future we're going to have an Asian American woman as president in the U.S. who has a liaison in Japan is fascinating and optimistic. And I thought that was thinking of things now, especially with just horrible things going on here in the States and having to, I never thought I would have to go, hey, don't hurt my friends and their families, jerks.
Yeah.
Like, don't attack my friends.
Yeah.
That I have. What's wrong with you? That I never thought. I mean, yeah, of course, there's always racism, but just the way that things are happening this year and over the past couple of months, especially. Again, kind of what Drew was dealing with, like, hey, it's just in this movie. There's a whole section where, politicians, hey, if you don't watch out, you're going to lose your bid for being president. And I had kind of forgotten that subplot just because I hadn't watched the movie in a long time. But I thought that was actually a really cool, hey, look, here's what, and that kind of interplay between, hey, well, I'm going to be president. I'm going to need somebody over here and we're going to have to play politics back and forth. I found that fascinating as well. Like, hey, pretty soon you're gonna have, Asian American woman as president. Who's had Godzilla experience. This is the world of Shin Godzilla posits this, and I thought that was really cool. To be honest, it's something it didn't hit me in the same way that it did this time, given everything that's been happening over the past year and especially over the past few months.
It's a great point. There has been so much anti-Asian hate, and it doesn't matter, even though supposedly the hate comes from the fact that the virus originated in China. It's equal opportunity Asian hate. Like they hate all Asians equally. These people.
And who the hell punches old? I don't care who
anybody
you are. Who
old
punches the old people or anybody?
To be fair, that guy was already evil. He had already killed his mom or something. He'd been in jail.
Right, but I'm just the fact, all of that, the fact that we live in a world where you have to tell people, don't do these things that seem really obvious.
Sure,
and just be good people. Just how it just seems like it's not that hard. It shouldn't be hard to empathize with people and wonder what would I want to be treated this way? Would I want my family to be treated this way? And we live in a world where that's not always the case, and it's frustrating and angering and just.
But leadership is everything. I mean, model. We have to model behavior. We have to model empathy.
Well, and the horrible behavior happens regardless of the leadership, but the leadership can do something to stem it or to at least give consequences. And so when you don't have that, it gets that much worse.
And my friends, who are people of color, have had to deal with, a lot of this isn't necessarily new, but just how it's all happening.
Yeah.
But because of all of that, and just being angry and frustrated, and trying to do what we can do to help people, give what we've given to charities, and just try to spread word of just be good people. Come on, just do these things. Again, that all of that, how you watch, how you take in cinema and the things that entertain you changes. And so I just thought that, Rand and I were talking about it afterwards where, hey, wow, 2016, you have this movie where you have this woman who's, part of how she has to think about how she's going to deal with Godzilla and whether or not she stays actually when they say you should get out because we're going to drop a nuke. And she goes, look, my grandparents are from here. I'm not going to leave. Godzilla or no, nuke or no, this is where I am. But her, that realm of politics, I didn't think of in the same way as I did this viewing. And I think that, there's something about that, the transcendental nature of film and how your circumstances change your viewing of different movies for better or worse, or just in general, just as objectively. I found that to be fascinating. But and I like their banter and how she comes across. But her character is actually pretty fascinating. And when she chooses to play up, hey, I've just come from a party, and everybody goes, oh, well, that's the kind of person she is. And then, but when she needs to, that's part of how she works in politics. When it comes time to actually just work in politics, she's just like all business.
Well, I love that the actress who played her doesn't actually speak any English, so she was like super overwhelmed by how much English she had to learn.
Right.
Oh, that was
well, also, if you'll notice, something else that I always find fascinating, and we should probably get to the thing, to the final, but the pool of people who get to play Americans in movies is always just strange and fascinating and hilarious to me, because it's not necessarily if you're a good actor, but do you have the kind of look that we need for a part, or is there a star quality? Like I've seen sports, there's like a star who became famous in Japan, but wasn't as famous in the US, and he plays like a news reporter in one, or the scientists in this who just are terrible at their lines. But you see that more often than not, because it's more important that they just deliver the lines in a way that fits how they look in this situation. And I asked a friend of mine, because I was like, why are all these people what's wrong? And they said, oh, well, there are good actors, but a lot of the talent agencies, they don't need those actors to be super great actors. They really just need them to deliver these lines convincingly enough for people to go, oh, that sounds like English.
Yeah.
And and you look a certain way.
Who was talking about doing was it a YouTuber? It was a YouTuber, wasn't it? Who was talking about how she lived in another country, and they said, we need a person who speaks English to be in this movie. And she wasn't an actor at all.
It was a TV series. She was on a sitcom, and they said, you're going to play the main character's son. It's a family sitcom. You're going to play the son's American girlfriend for
and she's like, I'm not an actor.
Yeah, no, a friend of mine had a bit part.
Super funny.
I met him through this friend. A friend of mine had a bit part in a Japanese, I want to say it was a show, but it could have been a movie. And basically the criteria was, are you young enough and blonde?
Yeah, that was all she was. She was a female American who was young.
Yeah. And it seems like there would be more, like you could find an actor who's like, hey, I want to make it in Japan. I want to,
right.
But he had this look that they wanted, very a cool hip look. And he's like, I'm not an actor. You don't have to. Here's all your lines. You don't even just say these lines. It's fine, because you only have to be convincing enough and fit that part.
Right.
But that's I ask about that, and that's kind of really where a lot of, there's exceptions to the rules, of course, right? But in a movie like this, or Devilman, or any number, you'll just have a person. Oh, the scientists in some of the 90s Godzilla movies are just, there's a couple of guys you're like, there's not a guy who can
you couldn't
deliver
find
the lines better than this, and but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to
Right.
be better than that. I just find that fascinating. Yeah.
Let's
No
get-
offense to the people who hey, they got paid and they looked like a scientist, and that's great. But
Oh no, I'd do it. Yeah, sure. Right. It's like, wow, that would mean that I could write off this trip. You bet. Yeah. Let's get our final thoughts. We're going to
also,
start with Julia.
you're not writing off a trip. You're in Japan. So it's
Well,
like,
there you go. Yeah.
are you in Japan at this time, and do you have this look? And it happens in our movies as well, but just the way that it happens in Japan, I've always been fascinated by.
So yes, final thoughts. I have enjoyed the conversation. I hadn't, like I said, really thought about it, interestingly, from the perspective of this last year and just the last 5 years, really. But it has been interesting going through. I think one thing we didn't really talk about enough, and that just blew me away, what were the effects. I didn't feel like it looked like CG most of the time. There was a couple of things that were a little goofy looking, but mostly I thought it looked like a giant monster was destroying a city. That's really it was so scary. It was, and I like I say, I really enjoyed kind of exploring the different ways that the government people and military people and science people would respond to this emergency. So yeah, it's been interesting. At first I didn't know if I was going to like it when we first started watching it, and then I was like, oh no, this is really interesting. So yeah, so I'm glad that we talked about it.
Thank you, Julia. Drew, what are your final thoughts on Shin Godzilla?
I don't think my thoughts on the movie have really changed, although I haven't enjoyed the conversation, because I think, there's a lot of meat to this movie. And I think it's a great discussion starter. And again, if you are a Godzilla fan and you haven't seen it, I do think it's a really important addition to the franchise, even though I do have some reservations about the interpretation of Godzilla. Like it's ultimately still a very intelligent monster movie that I think that if you need to get past, if you were like, because I've seen other people say similar things to what I've said on this online, and to which I am now responding. If you need to get past that kind of stuff to get to the issues that this movie brings up and the satirical stuff, because I think that's the more important aspects of this movie than how Godzilla looks or what his powers are. I think it's the societal stuff that it brings up is what makes this a great movie. And again, I think it's such a worthy movie to watch right now, and after a year of seeing Trump bureaucracy just fumble a disaster every which way they can, and not show respect to his scientists that he was working with. This movie plays very well in that light.
That was fantastic. Tony, what are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I agree with Drew, actually, in the way that, having everybody does an updated Godzilla in a different way, and we've seen it released several times. So a pot boiler, West Wingy Godzilla, right? A political drama Godzilla definitely adds an extra depth in a way that we only saw bits and pieces of. And then in the 54 Godzilla, and then only if you kind of go to the commentary, because it kind of brings it more into, hey, this is how this tribunal worked. This is what you could do politically, because we're kind of so far removed from that. So being able to see how a news cycle works in Japan and reading about politics in Japan more readily nowadays will kind of shed the different light on how this would work. And I also agree with Julia, because it's just such an insane disaster movie. Buildings being cut in two, a Godzilla that is once again a force of nature just stumbling, and then even when he's inert is just leaning into a building that people hopefully have been evacuated from, but he tips the whole building full of people over at one point, and none of them are coming out of that, or very few, and how terrifying just not knowing what's going to happen next, because once lasers are involved, Godzilla lasers are involved, even people who may have thought, well, I'm not in the direct path of a Godzilla, I'm somewhat safe, and we don't try to evacuate Tokyo until they actually say, hey, let's drop a nuke on it. It doesn't matter where you are in the area. There's a Godzilla that has volumetric flame, napalm, and lasers. So you're just and it's at the end. It's not even, they didn't even chase it back into the sea. There's an inert Godzilla.
Yeah, it's more like it is more like nuclear war, where it's like even if you don't get hit by the bomb, you have the radiation to deal with afterwards.
Sure. And they're dealing with that too, right?
Exactly.
They go, well, hey, it's getting really dangerous here. Mm-hmm. And they deal with that a little bit in some of the previous ones, but in here they especially, you have a bunch of scientists, you have X amount of scientists who are concerned with, there is this much radiation buildup in these areas, and we really need to pay attention to that. And
isn't there a Godzilla who is melting down through the movie?
Oh yeah, Destoroyah.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Like he basically, in the same way that they use cadmium, which is what you use in fuel rods, to 85 Godzilla to try to slow down his nuclear. It basically, that goes in the opposite direction, where you've got a Godzilla who's been dealing with so much stuff that his nuclear reactor is a danger to everything. Because then you have a Godzilla who is a walking nuclear bomb. And if I'm not mistaken, that one also has Hong Kong stuff. So, Godzilla versus Kong has a lot of fan service. Back to all of our favorite stuff, even now.
We should do some of the Heisei Godzillas at some point.
I agree. I'm ready to listen to you guys as to what you want to hit next, because I'm enjoying this experiment.
I love the Mecha Godzilla ones. I'm a big fan. But some of those are goofier than others in the fact. But
one of the better ones, unfortunately, is Biollante, and that's hard to find.
Right, Biollante is a better film than Space Godzilla.
Although the Space Godzilla,
I don't see how that could be possible.
The Space Godzilla creature design is the Space Godzilla
does look
really cool. Yeah.
I have one on my
Biollante the giant rose?
Yes, correct.
Yes. All right, I'm ready to
watch Godzilla.
I'm ready for some nonsense. I'm ready to watch Godzilla fight a giant rose.
On my shelf, though, I do have a Godzilla, a Space Godzilla.
Sure. But
I prefer Biollante is a better movie. And there's some really goofy stuff with King Ghidorah and all, but I have all those, and I seriously dig all of that stuff. But I really enjoy this movie. I did see there were a bunch of stuff that I liked even better now, and that it hit differently than when I saw it in the theater. Although, like I said, I do wish that there was a just amazing, awesome US release with all the super bells and whistles, behind the scenes and all of that. I think the Blu-ray that's out that I have is good, but as a fan, I would love to have the super deluxe Arrow or Severin or Criterion or Third Window, any of the more niche, I guess Criterion's not, but any of the ones who are making really cool stuff, because all of those, Vinegar Syndrome, all of those companies are doing amazing, cool box sets now, and I would buy it from any of them.
Awesome. All right. Before we go, we need to get our endorsements. I'm dying to know what you guys want to recommend. From you? Oh, I've talked so much that there is nothing else that I would add. I think that was wonderful. My final thought was I'm ready to watch some nonsense. I've gone clear on over to the other side. I'm like, yep, whatever. Let's watch a giant lizard fight a rose from space. That sounds great. Okay, Julia, do you have anything to endorse? Like anything that we should see that you've been seeing?
I binge watched a Netflix documentary called This Is a Robbery. And it is about the largest art heist in history, which was a museum in the Boston area, the Gardner Museum. And it was quite riveting because at first I thought, oh, okay, it's just going to be, beautiful art, beautiful location, and like what happened. No, it's like it features the Italian mob, the Irish mob, like eccentric, philanthropist lady. Like, there's all these. It's just really interesting. I can't believe I got sucked into this documentary. So I definitely recommend that if you like art or anything documentary or mob related. And then I think I've already talked in the past about The Equalizer with Queen Latifah, but I'm still really enjoying that series if you haven't checked it out yet.
Fantastic. I thought you were going to mention the other thing that we were watching.
Well, you said you were going to talk about that, so I'll let you
I will talk about it. Yeah, you bet. But Drew, what about you?
So, I've come to think about this a lot in recent weeks about how much animated stuff that I watch, because I think I watch way more cartoon. You talk about questioning whether or not you're something that you're watching is something as a worthy time passer. Like I've fully come to peace that I am a 40-something-year-old man that enjoys watching cartoons a lot. I've been rewatching Superman the animated series because it's just cropped up on HBO Max, and I love the show. I know the DC animated stuff is so vast, and everybody's got their favorite thing, and usually it's Batman because Batman was a tremendous artistic achievement. But I think the Superman show is very worthy of the Batman show, and I think the different kinds of stories they do with Superman is fascinating because you'll have one episode that's very much like the Mr. Mxyzptlk episode is very much like something straight out of the Silver Age, but then they'll do one that's like a very serious crime story for an episode that's very film noir influence. And I love the diversity of the stories, and I'm a lot of people are often shocked to find that I'm actually a bigger Superman fan than a Batman fan. And people because usually if you're a horror fan, you tend to prefer Batman because of the obvious thematic ties there. Sure. But I think this is a really good interpretation of Superman's world, and if you have HBO Max and you haven't watched this before, because I've talked a lot to people online, and I've been kind of amazed to learn that there's a lot of people that have seen the Batman show and they've seen Justice League, but they've completely skipped over this show. And I'm telling you, not only will this completely enrich your next rewatch of Justice League, because there's a lot of story arcs that carry over between the two, but this is just such a beautifully animated, beautifully acted, very well written love letter to Superman, and I just love it. So that's my endorsement is if you haven't seen it in a while, rewatch it, or if you've never seen it, give it a shot because it's awesome.
It is wonderful. I really missed that show. It was really great. Gosh, Tony, what about you? Endorsements, if you have any.
Yeah, I have a few things, but the things that kind of floated to the top where if you want to watch more thriller, there's a really good movie, Fukushima 50, about the the actual Fukushima nuclear plant meltdown and all of that. And it is, I saw it at a film festival this past year, and it really stuck with me. But it looks like it's on Amazon Prime and a few other places. I think it might be on Apple TV as well. But Fukushima 50 was done really well, in my opinion. And I like I said, it stuck with me all year. So if you're wanting more of the how does a disaster go down, but even more realistically, that's a movie you can watch right now in the U.S. Looks like it's English and Japanese with subtitles on Prime, so that's cool. In the crazy land, I also, in addition to watching normal archive crazy stuff, a very crazy town Jackie Chan movie called Bleeding Steel. Sci-fi action. I don't know if it's a great movie, but it has been a really fun movie. I just came across it. It was on, hey, look, new Jackie Chan. It's pretty insane, crazy and enjoyable. There's not much sci-fi Jackie Chan that I've seen. So, and this isn't, all sci-fi, but it is, near future elements to it. So it's pretty crazy. Also, just a shout out. I did a Kickstarter. Animego did a Kickstarter for Megazone 23, 80s anime that was done really well. Parts of it were used for the Robotech the movie, which only showed once in Dallas. And I remember I was so mad because I saw the commercials all summer while I was staying with my dad in Dallas and then couldn't go see it. And it ended up years later, I found out that was the only screening of that Robotech the movie ever.
Gosh, wow.
It turned out bootlegs and such, but the screening, the actual, the one they advertised, it didn't go anywhere but there. And there's this great motorcycle transformation scene that they hyped. But of course, at the time, I had no idea that was Megazone 23. So I backed the Kickstarter and I just got mine recently, and wow, is it a cool box of awesome. So if you're an 80s anime fan, I think they might be selling it on the Animeko site. This isn't me just going, hey, I got this cool thing, you can't get it, but there's some cool stuff there. And they did it so well. Sometimes when you back a Kickstarter and you just gotta kind of hope that it's cool. But when I got this, it was like, oh, okay, this was worth the wait. This is somebody and I've been a fan of theirs for a long time. They were one of the originals putting out stuff in VHS back in the day. So definitely, if you're a fan, there's a cool box of Megazone 23 that is now available, because it used to be a lot harder to find. So, but yeah, that's been my main things. And then, Rain and I have been watching Marvel movies because she's catching up from Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Oh,
so
interesting.
That convinced her to watch.
That's fascinating. That's what's convinced her.
Well, she's like,
I'm not saying anything against Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'm just saying there have been so many things that I've been like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So I'm glad she's finally getting around.
Well, she's just different,
Yeah.
We just watch different things. And so she just felt like, I think I'm missing something. What do I need to watch?
Yeah.
But it did turn out to be, she was, oh, well, what about this? I go, oh yeah, that's right. You need to, we started watching Infinity War, and she goes, what's going on? Oh, that's right. You need to watch Thor Ragnarok, which I just had forgotten how
Civil
fun that
War,
movie is.
and you have to kind of go back to all the
So I had to
There is now so much lore in the MCU that it's just as almost. Sure. I'm not going to say it's fully, but it's got just as much going on as the average issue of an X-Men comic or something. There's a lot of density to it at this point.
It's funny too, because she goes, "Oh, well, now I can talk about Marvel movies."
Yay!
We just got, when we
can
finally go hang out.
I love talking about Marvel movies so much.
And I go, well, until some jerk goes, yes, but do you even know when the first appearance of Thor is? She goes, that's when I would walk away, because I don't want to hang out with those people.
Well, please tell her, Tony, that to listen to the thing I endorsed last week is what she needs to now become obsessed with, which is Eric Voss, New Rockstars, because Eric Voss breaks down every single Marvel thing in detail, and he's really good at it. Yeah.
I got to also tell her the story that I think I told once on this podcast about watching Thor Ragnarok, and if there were these, women who were there, and they were kind of talkative at the beginning. I was like, it's the draft house, they can talk to the movie. But it was really funny because once Hemsworth gets his haircut and then he's shirtless. The woman next to me goes, audibly, and she goes, leads to her friend and goes, that's my new desktop wallpaper. Just loud enough that I could hear it, and I was like, you know what? I
love
it. Which is even funnier because when in Infinity War, or I can't remember, Endgame, when Thor is not as nicely muscled, Rain looks at me, she goes, that's my new desktop wallpaper.
That's fantastic. I love it.
But that was just such I'm normally a very, film is, I want to watch this in silence, and I'm not saying don't enjoy it, but it's the draft house, so you expect a certain amount.
Somebody that you'd get taken out if you don't.
Yeah. But that was a pretty hilarious enjoy, just funny, just because it was just everyone in that row could hear the
Yeah, for sure.
And
For
he's
sure.
a handsome dude.
Yeah, he works hard for that body.
So that I get it, but it was kind of funny. So, but yeah, I think we're mostly caught up to the point where everything kind of makes sense
Cool.
in Falcon, which is consistently is solid, and I love crime thriller stuff as well. So the fact that it's equal measure crime thriller and heroic stuff is cool to me. I really enjoy that aspect of that show.
Awesome. I will save my endorsement for next week.
You sure?
I am. Oh yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. But there'll be more time. I've really enjoyed this. I think this was a really, really in-depth discussion, and I think we hit on some cool stuff. So I'm excited to be back, and I think we're going to be doing another monster. We're going to be in some monster land for a while,
right?
So it's.
Oh, by
it's
the
gonna be
way.
really cool. Yeah.
If you go to Hideaki Anno's Wikipedia page, the things he's involved in, I don't know if everybody's going to be a fan of everything, but I forgot just how much cool stuff he's been a part of. Not just as a director, but as an animator, doing storyboards.
No, yeah, he's been directing since like the 80s,
right.
Like when he was in his 20s.
Knew,
yeah.
But you forget sometimes if you're not in that constantly. And I remember reading, and I love the stuff he's done. But looking back again, just for this, episode, was holy moly, he is like starting, especially because the thing he animated in Nausicaa just looks amazing. So this is a person who knows his business. And it is really cool that he had such an interesting take that is very much in his wheelhouse as a director and screenwriter. So it made a lot of sense. And in fact, when it was announced, everybody goes, so how does Evangelion meets Godzilla? How's that work? And we get to see that. It's a political thriller a la with a monster in it. Is
fantastic.
So he, just an amazing person as far as just what he's accomplished as well. So I think it's worth checking out his stuff. If you just want to watch monsters or you just Godzilla, that's cool. But if you have further interest, almost everything he's been involved in is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, no, it's a very storied career. All right, everybody. Check back with us. First of all, join us on the Facebook page and let us know what you think, or if we're way off base, or if you agree with us. And check back next week, because I think it's going to be, this time, something along the lines of King Kong. But I think we haven't decided yet what title. I'll let the gang decide. And I can't wait. So
the more people ask again, hey, what's your next plans? The secret is yet again that
we don't know.
We don't have our stuff together as much as the Japanese political system.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but we make up for that with spryness. So, okay.
All right. Have a great week.
Yeah, have a wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Night.